buddy.
We are talking Tour of Duty, Season 2, Episode 5. Now this follows on some storylines from the previous episode. You may remember that Goldman inadvertently had saved a group of Vietnamese from a bomb. And as such, he's been regarded as a kind of hero, a war hero. And as such, has been used as a kind of a publicity stunt to give the kind of the press office like a kind of more of a friendly face, an upwardly mobile, good story, so to speak. So he is off doing kind of press duties for the Major, which means we have a new lieutenant in our kind of squad. And this lieutenant is Puerto Rican, like Ruiz, and is kind of a little bit inexperienced. And on his first mission out, he ends up kind of walking straight into a trap and getting wounded. Now, Ruiz saves him, and because they kind of have this common bond in the fact that they're both kind of Puerto Rican in descent, they strike up a bit of a kind of a friendship. But the main storyline consists of the Major, who has been essentially putting out bounties on looted kind of goods from temples and things like that, which kind of certain kind of soldiers are looting from various different locations and then selling to the Major. Now this ultimately gives a kind of a few misadventures along the way, and then we also have another storyline here where we get a rival for Jennifer Seymour's affection in the form of a suave doctor who is a person of her past, as a kind of a love rival to Anderson, and yes, another love triangle. So what do we think of this episode? Now, despite the kind of the reliance on the kind of the tried and tested love triangle trope, which I have to say I think is misplaced in Tour of Duty, I still quite enjoyed the episode. I like to kind of see this kind of bond between this new lieutenant and Ruiz. I would have actually liked to have kind of seen it over a couple of episodes. I think it was a little bit kind of short to really have much kind of impact, to be honest with you. And I quite like the fact that what we did see, this lieutenant is kind of, very kind of gruff at the beginning and kind of like, laying down his authority, so to speak. But he really kind of ends up kind of being quite humble. And I think it was good, but I just think it was too truncated. It needed to be maybe in a couple of episodes, maybe where Goldman was kind of doing this this kind of press thing to really have, I think, the impact. And that's true, I think, of a lot of these kind of these stories of this season, is that it does have kind of through lines, but a lot of them are kind of like started and kind of resolved in the kind of the same episode almost. And I actually think sometimes they end up doing too many kind of stories as well. Not to mention the ones I've already mentioned, we also have another subplot where McKay kind of gets grounded for kind of disobeying orders. At the end of the episode, he still is on to kind of suspension. So we have quite a lot kind of going on. And although I think some of this stuff is interesting, I feel maybe it doesn't give the kind of the room to breathe. And I think some of these things may have been spread out kind of through the season and been a little bit more kind of overreaching and stuff like that, even though there is certainly more through lines here than the first season. One thing I did like was when you compare even though I'm not a big fan of the kind of the love triangle storylines here, you compare the love triangle between like Goldman, Alex Devlin and McKay, where Goldman is quite kind of aggressive towards like McKay. Anderson is quite different towards this kind of doctor, where he actually kind of keeps his cool pretty much, and I think wins the day ultimately, because he ultimately outwits this doctor and kind of shows his true colours. But again, some part of me thinks it's a little bit too short, that you didn't get time for the kind of storylines to kind of ferment, and maybe in a way that it would have been more kind of effective if we genuinely thought that Seymour might have, considered it. Because at this point, we've only seen her for a couple of episodes, and she's already told Anderson that she loves him in this episode. So I think some of these kind of storylines either could have been dropped in favour of having the expansion of some of the other kind of the storylines and giving it a little bit more depth, or put them over a kind of, as I say, multiple episode. Because I think this movie is, sorry, this television show, certainly in this season, is trying to find things for each of our characters to do. You know, we get Taylor and kind of Taylor and Johnson off on kind of a little adventure as a kind of a comedy kind of side adventure where they're trying to return the artifacts and that where they believe that they're cursed and things like that. Doesn't really go anywhere, but you know, again, it's just finding these things, finding these little kind of like subplots for these characters to do, and it feels a lot more like, even though I appreciate the fact that this does have more of an overreaching plot than maybe the first season, I feel it ends up being more TV-like in the fact that everything's kind of got to be wrapped up within an episode or two, and nothing really kind of feels fleshed out. Now, that being said, the kind of the more of the long form storytelling wasn't all that prevalent in the 80s. That's more of a kind of a you know, a post kind of 2000 sort of trend in the 80s television. It was certainly more episodic, and they didn't have quite as long, you know, long form kind of storytelling as they kind of do now. So, you know, we have to remember that when we're kind of looking at a television show from the 80s. I would say as well, the I keep calling it a movie. The episode ends pretty strongly as well with a helicopter rescue from McKay. I've never been a big fan of the character of McKay. I just think his character just seems he's written to be quite shallow, and he doesn't really seem to have a lot of depth in his character. And what kind of good, when he turns like good guy, it just seems a little bit like easy in a way. But nonetheless, I did like the kind of like his disobeying orders for a second time to go out and rescue kind of like Goldman and his squad, which I think goes somewhere at least into kind of improving the relationship between kind of McKay and Goldman, even though they kind of do still come out to loggerheads here and there. I also think the way the Alex Devlin, as another kind of negative here, kind of like ends up confronting the kind of the Major with this kind of like accusation about what which of course he is doing, about kind of stealing these kind of artifacts and things like that. I'm not quite sure an army major would be quite back down from a member of the press quite as easily as he does, without really knowing what evidence she might have and things like that. Again, it just seemed a little bit too truncated to me. I think the storylines here were good and were interesting, and was an enjoyable and engaging episode. I just felt it didn't really have enough time to register that much drama, because it was just trying to do a little bit too much in obviously a 45-minute episode to have all these kind of storylines, and I think it may have been more effective had they at least have gone over a couple of episodes. And sometimes, like the Goldman as a kind of a press officer, you know, you feel like it didn't really go all that. It didn't really go anywhere. He ends up becoming back in the squad by the end of this episode, and you know, again, that could have been dropped, to be honest with you. That was just an excuse to have this this second lieutenant, and again, that storyline ended up just being like a bit of a thing for Ruiz to think, no, I'm going to stick with the men and not this easy option to kind of get out the army, which is what ultimately happens. But I don't know. To me, I think this would have been better had it been a little bit more spread out to me, to get a little bit more emotional impact on it. But them's the times. But the action was pretty good here. Some nice kind of helicopter sequences. I think the editing was better than some of the other episodes I've mentioned. But some of the kind of the storytelling narrative wasn't quite as impactful as maybe it could have been. What did you think of this particular episode? Please do let me know, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.